Welcome back to another episode of the Maker's Playbook. If you've been following along real time, you know this episode is launching a couple of days later than usual. Because my friends, oh man, it's August, and I'm still a wedding photographer full-time, so life is a bit crazy. Not to mention, we launched the Maker's Photography Styling System, which is our 6-week online course all about photography styling specifically for ceramicists and other makers, and we're starting out our very last week of that course this week. It has been so exciting to not only see the photographic learning and growth of the 29 students that joined us, but also, maybe even more importantly, how they've all connected with each other to build a little budding makers community. Honestly, I think I'm most excited about that of all, because having a support network of peers was absolutely crucial to getting my own business off the ground 11 years ago. Not to mention, throughout all of those years, figuring out the twists and turns and everything that life throws at us solo makers. If you are feeling bummed that you missed out on that course, well, the bad news is I'm most likely not opening the doors again until the start of next year because, like I said, it's wedding season. But you don't have to wait until then to get started on learning more photography tips. Be sure to snag our at-home photography cheat sheet by going to makers-playbook.com and clicking the Get Free Photo Tips button in the top right. Downloading that cheat sheet will also get you into the monthly photography tips email crew. But enough about photography. This week, I'm sharing an incredibly candid conversation I had with Katie Meili, who is a resident potter at the Village Potters in Asheville, North Carolina. We chat about the difficulties of mental health and how it feels when life takes unexpected turns that throw you off a path everyone else around you is on. Not to mention, though, the silver linings that brought us to clay and the importance of having a community that supports and pushes us as artists. Oh, and how an entire ruined kiln, I'm talking entire kiln load of completely useless pots, brought Katie to her distinct style we know and love today. Enough for me. Let's hear all about it from Katie. Hey, Katie, welcome to the podcast.
Hi.
Thanks so much for taking the time out. I know, it's such a big deal to carve out an hour of life and not be making and talk to a random girl who sent you an Instagram DM.
I just feel honored that I'm able to be on a podcast because this is my first podcast recording.
Awesome. Trial by fire.
Yeah.
For people that don't know you, how would you introduce yourself to a mysterious audience you can't see, but only listen to?
So I'm Katie. I'm a 25-year-old studio potter that lives in Asheville, NC. I am a resident artist at the Village Potters Clay Center that's in the River Arts District here, which is a very artsy area of our town. And I've been a resident since November 2020, but I worked at the Village Potters for 2 years as an apprentice prior to that. But that's like my professional career is just at the beginning stages. So, yeah. From
the outside in, looking at your work and the way that you merge the actual form of your pieces with the glaze work that you do is so thought through that I thought you were much, much older.
Right. Well,
that's a compliment.
I get that a lot. Yeah, no, I get that a lot. I'm definitely mature for my age, and I think that has to do with my background as to how I got here. People who are 25, they talk about the quarter life crisis. I went through the quarter life crisis at 21. That can explain some of my emotional maturity, and then also being at the Village. I call it the Village, even though the full name is the Village Potters Clay Center. Being at the Village, I'm surrounded by professional artists who have been doing this for 20 to 30 years, making a living as potters. And so to be immersed in that, it has made me grow exponentially under a very short amount of time.
That sounds amazing. And also what an incredible example to be able to see, this is possible. And people have done it for a long time, not just someone saying, oh yeah, I started my business 3 years ago. Let me teach you all about how to do Instagram marketing. And it's kind of like, yeah, but is this going to work for the long term, you know?
Right, because Instagram works now, but who knows what it'll be like in 10 years, what will be the platform be. And I think that's the cool thing about the artists that I work with. They used to be my mentors while I was an apprentice at the Village. And now they're my peers, but also still my mentors. And the proof is in the pudding. And they also, not just being like ceramic artists, but I'm surrounded by only women. And so it's a very empowering, but it's not so like it's women that aren't pushing that they're all women. It just happened that way.
That's amazing. Well, tell us a little bit about that quarter life crisis at 21 and how you got to where you are now. And then we'll dig more into the Village because I'm fascinated and exponentially jealous of this entire situation.
It's a good gig. I can't lie. So I first started ceramics in high school. For senior year, I was a big athlete in high school, and I just wanted a chill class to start the day. So I took it on a whim, which seems to be a common theme with a lot of artists nowadays. So it's how I started out my day. It was my first period. I loved it. And then when I went to college, I went to Center College in Danville, Kentucky. I was recruited for field hockey. And my ceramics teacher said, oh, you should maybe take a class there, not at the school, but like in a local community arts center that's no pressure, just for fun, to keep your hands in it. So I did that. There was a place that's right off of campus that I think it's called now the like Bluegrass Community Arts Center. But I took some wood-fired pottery classes just as no pressure to have fun while I was in school. And in high school, playing sports, I had one very serious concussion from soccer that totally knocked me out. And I didn't do the rehab and recovery that I needed to do. And so I had some lingering mood and attention problems from that concussion. And then when I got to college, I had decided not to play field hockey because it was so a major part of my identity. And later I played it because I missed it so much. But I had a second very serious concussion in college in physics lab. And
you got a concussion in physics? Like I just assumed you got a concussion on the field hockey field. But
right. I played field hockey from like high school and then a little into college. And I never got a concussion in field hockey, only ever soccer, which I played pretty competitively for a lot of my life, which is
a reasonable place to get a concussion. That makes sense.
But then my other major concussion was physics lab, and people always question that. And so basically we were doing a projectiles lab, and there were these glass cabinets in the lab. And so there were these pieces of plywood that were propped up against the cabinet.
Okay.
And I went to go reach down to grab the projectile, and the plywood had tilted and basically just fell over on me. And it was probably like an inch thick of plywood.
Okay.
And there were 16 people in the lab, and everybody just stopped dead in their tracks because it was skull and wood, just like a thump. Yeah. It was not good. And so I think I was 19 at the time, and that was the first time I had ever experienced memory loss. Like, I would be in lecture and 5 minutes would pass and I wouldn't realize what the professor said 5 minutes before that. And it was just really, truly detrimental to my processing and learning speed. And because they say as you get more concussions, the side effects build up on each other and get worse and worse.
Yeah, they compound upon each other.
Yeah, exactly. And I had good experiences with my professors, and ultimately I just couldn't keep up because I was having such a hard time processing homework that took me 3 hours, now took me 6 hours, and I still wouldn't get all the answers. And so I got really depressed from that slowing down of my processing speed. And got really depressed, got very anxious, this paralyzing anxiety, and ultimately I dropped out of college. And the college I went to was a very small liberal arts school, like a bubble. And all of a sudden, halfway through my junior year, I left school and I was out of my bubble. And all my friends were still in school. And the type of school it is, if you go for 4 years, nobody takes a break, you don't come back. Like you're in it and you live through it, and then you're out and you're in life. Nobody takes a gap year. It's not a thing. And so when I left school, I came back home. I grew up here in Asheville. I decided I was so depressed and unhappy with life, and I was away from my friends and my support system, that I wanted to just find something that could make me happy. And I remember that in high school, ceramics was a main part of that. And so when I came home, I lived with my mom, and I started taking some ceramic classes at our local community college just for fun, to be happy. And I also started like nannying actually, when I was younger, I had a nanny, and now she has kids. So I nannied for her kids. Oh, so it's like a circle. Yeah.
That makes the nanny experience so much better, because I nannied while I was getting my business off the ground to not have to take like business loans.
Totally.
Different experience than what you have, maybe.
Yes. And I was nannying for free. I really just had the time on my hands and wanted to spend time with her kids. And at the time they were like 3 and 7, I think. Yeah. Just so much fun, because I had like a personal relationship to them. And later I nannied for an infant, and she was also a family friend. And just, it was the first time where I ever experienced loving a child that wasn't like mine. I don't have kids. People talk about the love you have for kids. And that love and unconditional like attention that I was getting from those children, plus being in ceramics and keeping my hands dirty, while also being excluded from my friend group just because I wasn't physically there. But seeing it on social media was just a flurry of emotions, and that quarter life crisis ensued at 21 when I left school.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So basically my whole world like was turned upside down because of these concussions, and I just wanted to be happy again. That was my goal. And I decided once I left school, because I was on track to be more of a science, math, chemistry person. And those job fields, you make a ton of money. And so when I left school, I said, I don't care about how much money I make anymore. I just want to make sure that I have enough money and time to do the things that I love, like ceramics. And as long as I'm comfortable in that, I'll be happy, and that's all that matters. Because I was so depressed, on the verge of doing very bad things to myself, and the anxiety was truly paralyzing. And so I made that decision at the age of 21 that I just wanted to be happy, because it had been years ever since those concussions of just being unhappy and putting on a front. And I was like, I'm tired of putting on a mask every day, basically, is what it felt like. And so I started just getting my hands dirty again. And I was waitressing at the time at a place where I used to be a hostess and a busser at a local pizzeria that I love. And it got me by for a good year or two. And I was just finding out who I was outside of academia and sports. That's what brought me through the quarter life crisis that led me to ceramics.
What's fascinating to me is the expectation we all either get from social media or from the very well-meaning communities that we're a part of. What happened to you physically, scientifically, as far as your brain? It's only reasonable that you needed a break. It's only reasonable that you needed to figure out a different solution, because the way that academia is set up doesn't allow for the different learning needs and all these different things. And yet, because of the pressures we either give ourselves, or I think it's a combination that we give ourselves and society and all of these other things we don't have a long enough podcast for. It somehow feels like you did something. I'm putting my story on you now, but like, you didn't do anything wrong, but because your story took a turn separate from this majority of student friends that you had, you had to go through this really difficult time. I mean, we're all super glad now that look at where it's brought you, right? But when obviously you don't want anybody to have to go through pain, that's just the silver lining hindsight view.
Absolutely.
But it's like, as you're telling the story, I'm like, well, this progression only makes sense. Like, how else were you supposed to respond to that situation?
And I grew up very I'm adopted from China, but I never saw myself as any different than anybody else. So my mom is a single mom, a doctor. She adopted me and my sister. We grew up very middle class, white neighborhood kind of society. And so everybody went to college. That was just the thing you did.
You never even thought about an alternative. If you're like me, it was like, yeah, okay, after high school, I go to college. That's what you do.
Yeah, and I'm very grateful for that college experience, those 2.5 years that I was there, because of the friends I made. But it was a high pressure situation. And it was the school and the social expectations. I would post, nobody knew that I was so unhappy and not doing well in school and paralyzed from this slow processing speed, because I would put on this front that I was happy and satisfied with life. Because that's what you did with social media. So that's one of the cool things about your podcast, is you go behind the Instagram view of it, which was a big part of this quarter life crisis. Was I was putting on this front of being happy, being social, and going out with friends, when really I was just purely dying inside. And that was the nature of growing up in this social media time. But also, I think my college put this hyper importance on that, because it was a very small school. Everybody knew each other. And so that was an extra layer that some people might not feel, even if they grew up in this age.
Sure, absolutely. So you're working kind of the odd jobs, living back at home. How did you, because you mentioned you were an apprentice at the Village then before this residency you have now. So how did you get back into this space?
So I was doing some non-credit adult classes at the local community college for very cheap. And basically I outgrew that program. And my teacher, who was a professional potter there, and she just did this as one of her side jobs, she said, I think that you would really find a home at the Village. And she suggested a few different studios, but she thought that I would fit well there. And so I basically took a day where I went to the local studios and just saw what different programs they had in different classes, and came to the Village, and I immediately felt this warm feeling and just welcome friendliness. And they also had some really great classes. And so when I went into the gallery, I told them that I was looking into their program. And Judy Harwood, who's the woman who does raku at our studio, immediately came out from behind the desk and was like, let me give you a tour of our facility. And so it's a 1,400 square feet, 14,000, sorry, my bad, 14,000 square feet of studio, big difference. And she showed me their classroom. They have, we call it ISM, Independent Study Mentorship. And it's a advanced studies program where you basically get studio space, you work on a body of work and developing your style under the mentorship of the residents. So she showed me the Village has many streams of the business, and I was very interested in ISM and just their general classes that they give to the public. And this was spring 2018, I believe. And I took a class, a 12-week class in the summer called Advanced Throwing with Sarah Wells Rowland, who is our studio owner. And she's part of the Southern Highland Craft Guild, the second oldest guild in the country. And she's the owner of the studio, and her husband and a group of their friends built the Village from the ground up. So I took her class, and basically the first 3 weeks of that class were throwing and not keeping anything. Yeah. Because throwing cylinders, cutting them in half, shaping them, cutting them in half. And I had basically just been throwing for fun, and whatever this ball of clay turns out to be is what it'll be. I was planning on this being a bowl and not a vase, because you can't get it up that high. And so maybe I'll just turn it into a bowl. And so watching her talk about the intention behind making stuff was excellent and opened my eyes to the possibilities. And towards the end of that class, Sarah definitely saw potential in me, and she was like, so we have this ISM program, And like the students who are in it pay a monthly fee for access to the studios and the mentors. But within ISM, there are apprentices who ultimately don't pay that monthly fee, have access to this mentoring program, but instead work 8 hours a week for the studio. And so she knew that at the time I was serving, waitressing, and being a nanny. And so my means were limited. And oftentimes they give these apprenticeships to people who really need the financial help. So she offered this apprenticeship to me and said, just apply for it. And I got it because I showed my potential, I think, in that class. And that's how I ended up at the Village, basically growing out of the other programs that were just fun and looking for something more.
Well, and was that 12-week class adults? Because what I'm so fascinated about, too, is someone who's 10 years out of school, like being able to craft those skills in a way where you were also working. So is that a once a week nighttime class that other adults in the area were taking, or how does that actual structure look?
So the 12-week class that I took was part of our teaching center. And the teaching center portion of the Village is open to the general public. We have beginning, intermediate, and advanced classes. They meet once a week for 2.5 hours. And then on the weekends, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, they have open studio time. That's included in the class. For a 12-week class, I think I had 24 hours of open studio that I could just sign up for and come in and do my own.
That's similar to the studio that I got started back, the way I got back into ceramics 4, however many years ago now. 2020 has messed up my whole concept of how many years it's been.
Yes, time means nothing anymore.
Did it ever mean anything? Again, different podcast conversation. But like same idea that it was something that once a week on Tuesdays from 6 to 9 p.m. you could come and take a class, and I think ours were 8-week classes and not 12, but same idea that it was accessible to people, even because there's so many things I think in the arts world that do require a person to have a certain amount of means to even have access to, as far as a 1-year apprenticeship program. Well, like, how does that work if you're not making any money and you're a full-fledged adult? Like, you still have to pay for groceries and room and board and healthcare at the bare minimum. Yes.
Yeah, and so I feel very privileged because I did live at home with my mom and I didn't have to pay rent. So most of my money, like that I was doing nannying and serving, was going into food and just like other like play expenses. And yeah, the advanced class that I took was 12 weeks, but most of our classes at the Village are like 6 to 8 weeks. It depends on the level of class. And there are plenty of people who go in who maybe threw in high school and now they're in their 50s and they just want to do something fun on Tuesday nights, which has been really fun because as an apprentice, you also got the potential to teach. And so the apprentices were the ones who taught the beginning wheel classes. So, because teaching is a very, like, the idea behind the Village Potters is community and education and just like that creative, just always having creativity around you. So being like at the Village and being able to teach and convey the knowledge that I had been learning as an apprentice, like mixing glazes or how I threw this more efficiently, I was able then to convey it to other students, and it's repeating that mindset helps you learn it better.
Oh, absolutely. I taught oboe back in the day when I was still a musician, and you had to, because if you have a certain aptitude for a skill, you're not consciously thinking about it. So then when you have to explain it to someone, you go, oh, wait a second, how did I do that? Let me figure that out. And then you realize, oh, I could have done this better, or I need to fix this or whatever. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. How do I make this form? I never think about it. I just do it. So how to convey that. And then especially as an apprentice, I was conveying it to beginners. So I really had to go down to the basics of it, because throwing at a wheel isn't a natural body position. So to convey that too is to somebody who's never touched clay before, you really have to go to the bare minimum basics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you were in that apprentice position for 2 years?
Yes.
Okay.
The ISM program is a 1 to 3 year commitment. Okay. And the apprenticeships are usually a 1 or 2 year position that you like review every year. And one of the residents, Julia Mann, is resident that all the apprentices go to because she has her finger on the pulse of everything that's happening at the studio. As an apprentice, I had extra access to the studio, which was great because I nannied and was a server. So I needed those extra hours. Like I could stay from 6 a.m. to midnight. And so after nannying shifts, I would go from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. and just be there throwing, and the studio would be quiet because no one else was there, and I could just dive into it. And as an apprentice, we learned how to mix glazes, load kilns, which loading a kiln is basically a big game of Tetris. But
I always want to play the music in the background when we're doing it, like, and then you have to load faster and faster.
That is hilarious because I just did a time lapse of me loading a kiln, and I think I'm gonna have that music on over the background.
Yes, I love it. You can start it with the non-time lapse version of the video, and then the music increases.
Just speed it up. Yes, that's a great idea.
But I also just got a certain level of like stress in my body of just the idea of as those lines started to add up, and you were like, no.
Yes. Yes, that was one of the games, speaking of Tetris, that was one of the games when I was very depressed in college. For some odd reason, I would get into, I have a smidge bit of OCD, which you can tell if you look at my work. But it definitely manifested earlier on, like in college, and I had these like compulsions and like when I was depressed and in this paralyzing anxiety where I couldn't bring myself to get out of bed or read this book for class, I would compulsively and obsessively play Tetris and Candy Crush as a way to get my mind out of this like anxious state of all the work that was piling up that I would have to do. And so speaking of Tetris, it all comes full circle. I didn't make that realization or connection until now.
That's amazing. What's funny is I feel like Candy Crush I can see being the kind of slightly mindless, like just an action to do. Whereas Tetris to me is so high stress if those lines start to build up that I'm like, how did that help? How? Like that just gives me a very not serious version of anxiety thinking about losing at Tetris.
Right.
I completely digress.
I think at that point in college when I was playing games to distract myself from the reality, I was honestly so numb that because my stress level was so high that what's another Tetris game that adds to this already pile of anxiety that's there? I truly felt numb. So I was like, what's another mindless thing that adds more stress? Yeah. Yeah, it was a sad time.
And thank you for being so open and honest with it. I mean, that, like you said, that's part of why I love having started these conversations, because with Instagram and social media in general, everybody sees the end results. And so then the expectation is, gosh, I started a year ago and I should have 30,000 followers, or why can't I throw 10 pounds of clay or whatever it is. Hold on a second. You didn't see what happened before this person even started an Instagram account. What did they have to go through to get to that point, to have the style that they have that is so recognizable now and is so unique to them? Like, you never saw the mess before any of that because we don't post any of that.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that I've learned through, when I left school, I started going to therapy regularly and just talking about, because when I was in college, I didn't talk about my struggles. And I really think that it was this big secret that I was hiding. And it manifested in me not being able to bring myself to do anything. And so I realized that by talking about things, it takes away the power it has over you. And also I find that it's also, people will say, thank you for being so vulnerable and so open. And I am just that type of person naturally. I'm the oversharer and this is my story. Yeah. Because it's really just who I am. And I didn't realize that it was a superpower until I got into the real world and realized that other people don't do that.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. I also love calling it a superpower. That's fantastic.
That's something new that I started saying for myself, because I used to think of it as a weakness and the overshare. I'm trying to like justify what I'm doing, but it really is a way to connect to people, and that's in itself a superpower.
Absolutely. I love that. That makes me feel so much less self-conscious about the times you find yourself, even something as simple as like, I'm walking the dog and a neighbor's outside in the yard, and when someone says, hey, how's it going? I like stop and actually answer the question, and then you get 3 minutes into your response and realize, oh, you were just saying hi. You weren't actually asking,
yes, how are you doing?
And it's,
yes.
So, absolutely. I love that. Yeah. Okay, so 2 years I keep getting off on tangents, but that's okay, because I love this entire conversation. I just also find it's such a refreshing progression of things, as opposed to having the straight line is not very common for many people, but also recognizing, okay, you were working 2 jobs, you got this apprenticeship position, and also bravo to the Village for creating a space where people could get that feedback and that education in a way that was also sustainable for life, which is fantastic. Yeah. And then you transitioned what was the transition from apprenticeship into this residency program? What is that like?
So I think because Sarah saw my potential early on from when I took that class, and then she watched me during the apprenticeship, she really saw my style grow. And so the first year of my apprenticeship, we actually had an apprentice show where the residents have the gallery space, and they gave up some of their space for the 6 apprentices to put on an 8-week show and sell our work and put it out there. It was a ton of publicity for me, and it was the first time that I ever saw my work be sold. I was just like hoarding my work because I was like, it's not ready yet. I don't want to put it out there. The perfectionist in me wanting to keep it hidden until it was perfect. So it really pushed me to put my work out there and showed that I could be successful. And that apprentice show was when I decided that I wanted to do this for a full-time job, because I saw the potential. And I think 2 weeks into the show, I went to my serving job, and I said, I only nannied for like half of the time that I was there, and then the other time I was when I was at the Village, and then the rest of the time I was just a server. I basically said, in the next few months, I'm going to start pulling shifts back because I need to do this full time and commit to it. And so by the time the apprentice show ended, those 8 weeks, I had given up all my shifts and fully dove into this world that is pottery and ceramics. And I was very privileged because I had saved up money from nannying and serving, and I was living at home. And so the real chunk of my money was basically being saved, and I was able to use that saved up money as a safety net while I grew my business and my skill set. Yeah.
But at the beginning of that show, 8 weeks is a short period of time to have the realization and go full time.
It was. And I think it was easier because before this show and during that first year of my apprenticeship, I was nannying, and then I stopped nannying. So it felt like more of a part-time thing as being a server and also at the Village. And at the Village, because I was an apprentice, I also was able to teach. So I got teaching income from the Village too. And my cost of living was very low because I was living at home. And
you are speaking in past tense, and I do want to put that into context because Asheville is awesome. I love Asheville. I've been there once. I want to come back. I miss the mountains. Uh-huh. It used to be affordable. It's not like you're living rurally it could be that people think of North Carolina and they're not thinking of a high cost of living, but the cost of living in Nashville is, I think Alex was saying, the MIT study for the livable wage for someone in Asheville is like $22 an hour or something like that. So you might as well, it frightens me to think of whatever the study would be on Chicago and New York, but we're not talking about a low overhead here.
It is a extremely dense population. Everybody drives around here, gas, all of it is expensive. The rent is expensive. And so I'm extremely privileged and lucky to have a mother who is a physician, and her whole world is my sister and I. Because of that, she is so generous and for that time when I was going through figuring out my life, she really was this financial safety net if I needed it. And also just living rent free, I can't put into words how grateful I am for it. So now I don't live at home. I actually live with my boyfriend, and cost of living is extremely high. When I was a server, you would have to work every day of the week and at a good restaurant to live in town. And that's the problem with Asheville. I am very conflicted, and this gets into kind of like the politics of Asheville, but a lot of artists make money from the tourists who come here, especially like in the River Arts District. So tourism is a big part of our industry, but I feel guilty for profiting on the tourists when they're also the reason that's driving locals and the real workers of Asheville out of town. And especially because I work that serving job, I understand the hardships of working in the service industry, and that's what a lot of the industries in Asheville are. So there are a lot of artists who work part-time at a brewery or work as waitresses, because those are the jobs that are here.
Yeah, I can completely connect with that, because also I think the struggle, particularly with the arts, is at the end of the day, it's hard for a lot of us to admit we are a luxury. And so the person who has the means to buy handmade ceramics might not be the audience either that we are. It might not be the community that we're a part of, like in our day-to-day, or the neighborhoods we can afford to live in, or even a lot of the social justice aspects that I think are, at least my experience of the art world, often artists are more tapped into social realities and using their medium to speak to that. And there's that constant kind of push and pull between the reality of like, you deserve and should make a good living from what you're creating, and there's nothing wrong with that, but that also means that the audience that you're selling to might not necessarily be the community that you want to serve in. Yeah, I don't have a more put together thought process than that. Hopefully people can connect the dots.
No, absolutely. That's one thing that I'm still learning as I make pots is I am not my client. I am not my consumer. And to realize that, because I'm like, that's expensive to price it there. But at first, that's how I was feeling. Now I'm like, man, I need to raise my prices because that's a lot of time.
Because have you seen my grocery bill?
I have a puppy. She's expensive. I live with my boyfriend. We just have, life is expensive, especially in Asheville. Yeah, it really is a weird thing to wrap your head around when I would price this probably lower for myself if I were buying it. But I'm not my clientele, and I'm not the people I'm selling to. So I should raise my prices, and I should value my time, and I should value my art. Yeah.
Well, and just like I was having that conversation with Alex on episode 123, as far as you can build a business that is good for the world and good for business. And I think that's, for me, the place that I've come to as far as, okay, I can sit in this space as far as charging whatever I need to charge to make a decent living, because I know that I'm building the business based upon this value system and structure and how that's going to serve larger causes. But I can only serve those larger causes if we're in business, if we're making money. Yeah.
And that's one thing that the Village has really battled with, is that the Village itself, the Village as a business, the Village Potters, isn't a big profit business, but the Village has given artists like me and my small pottery business a safe haven and a platform that has elevated me. And so I have made a living from being a part of the Village, if that makes sense. And for instance, the morals and values of the Village have been around education and this Sarah's theory, and I mentioned Sarah a lot because she's our owner and one of my biggest mentors, that her idea is to nourish and develop the next generation of potters. And so the independent study mentoring program, the ISM program that I was part of, doesn't make money. It is purely something that she wanted to make out of her heart because she wants to share her knowledge and skill. And so the value of the village is the morals and the community that it creates based on these values that we all share, you know? And so, yeah, I think Sarah and the other residents and I really focus on the values that we're putting out there rather than focusing on the money. But we still want to make ends meet. But the true meaning of the village is like being in a community and being all together.
Yeah, absolutely. And also just not even make ends meet, but my kind of stake in the ground, if you will, is also to thrive. Because I think coming from, so I worked in nonprofits before I launched my business, and having to come to terms with the difference as far as now all of a sudden I was having to set the prices and I was having to say my time is valued at X was such a 180 degree difference from working in nonprofit. There was a salary and you got told and that was that. And
yeah,
but that also that realization of, I guess what I'm trying to get to is letting go of the guilt around there is also nothing wrong, not only with making ends meet, but thriving in the sense of when you own your own business, you have to be the one to say, I'm going to increase the price of these pots because there's nothing wrong with me wanting to go on vacation.
Yeah.
And make it whatever kind of vacation you want. Because if you were employed by somebody else, you would get your 2 weeks every year, or you would get your annual bonus, or you would, there'd be all these systems in place that you would grow with over time. And I'm constantly thinking about the fact that, like, I've had my business for 11 years now. And if I worked for somebody else for 11 years, where I would be at in, like, the bracket, I just can't think about it too much.
Yes. And I think it's hard to come around. Yeah. There are benefits to working for yourself. I set my own schedule, and I'm a nighttime person. I hate the mornings, even though I got up way too early this morning, but I actually get up probably at like 9 every day, which is, it's early for me, but I do it because of my boyfriend and we have a puppy, and I do the morning walk because he works from home, but has to be online for 9 to 5. But because I work for myself, I can do the morning walk, and I can have my work day start at 11 and go till 8 or 7 because that is what I dictate. And it really works for our lifestyle. And things might change, but for now, it works really nicely. So I wouldn't trade working for myself for anything.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You're going to laugh when I say I take the morning walk because Francesco is not a morning person, but that's at 6.
Oh my gosh.
Because my happy time, like not happy time, but I've just learned my most productive time, I can get more work done between 7 or 8 in the morning and 1 o'clock in the afternoon than like from 2:30 or 3 to 5. Mm-hmm. I'm just useless. That's when, if anybody ever looks at the timestamps of anything I post on Instagram or any of that, it's all happening from 2 to 5. Because I'm just like, bloop, 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 I can't concentrate.
Yeah, my productive time used to be, before I did this time adjustment because we have this puppy and we moved in together around the same time, used to be like 7 p.m. to midnight was my like production time.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. Yeah. So now let's talk about real life right now.
Yeah.
So being a resident, you're full-time, this is it, you're all in. So how is that looking? What's real life, either day to day or kind of what keeps the lights on, what keeps everything going?
Yeah, so when I was transitioned from an apprentice to a resident, I knew that in my second year of apprenticeship, I knew that I was going to become a resident. So I started to pick up more tasks that I knew that as a resident I would have. So like we have weekly meetings as a resident, which I honestly, even though people are like, I'm meeting every week, I love it because it keeps us all on the same page. And if there are problems that arise, we nip them in the bud every week. And we always have a lot of going on at the village. And you can't keep up with it all. So to have that meeting and everybody comes in and this is what I'm working on, this is what the teaching center is doing, we're just all on the same page. So my day-to-day life being a resident is basically setting my own schedule in my production cycle. So as a resident at the Village, it's not rotating. We re-up every year for a year commitment. And versus other artist residencies where they're for 18 months or 6 months and you come in and come out, the Village is more of a permanent residency. And as long as it's a good fit between you and the community, then, you know, you can stay as long as you guys dictate. Like every year you can evaluate things and be like, okay, I want to go this year. Or I want to stay this year. And so we've had people in and out, but a lot of the core 6 of us who are here now have been here for many years. 3 of the women have been there since the start in 2011. And the other 3 have been there for at least 3 to 5 years now. And so I'm the newest. And I'm also the youngest by 30 years. It's a beautiful combination of skills. You know, I am young and am savvy with technology and social media. So I'll share those skills with them and they'll share their knowledge from years of expertise with me. And so my day to day, I'll get up, walk my dog Lila, and go into the studio around 11, 12, and can sit down at the wheel and throw. I'll have lunch with my studio mates. Sometimes we have some picnic tables outside. And it really just depends on what I am doing in my production cycle. As a resident, we also work in the gallery once a week so that we can, one, meet clients. And because we work in the gallery, normal gallery cut for consignment is 40-60. 60 to the artist, 40 to the gallery. But because we work that one day a week, we get a 30-70 cut, which is beautiful. I would work 2 days a week if I could get it all. But there is overhead.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. But I really enjoy, I'm a social person, so I enjoy meeting clients and people who are interested in my work. So that one day of talking and meeting people is really fun for me. This coming fall, I won't be in nearly as much because I actually have a few shows that I have to do. I have hired somebody to work my gallery days because I'm making enough in the Village Gallery to be able to afford, like, my time is worth not working the gallery and spending the time throwing and dotting and glazing. Yeah.
I love that dotting is a clear, for anybody who hasn't actually looked at your work, obviously we'll have a link to your Instagram in the show notes, but I love that, like, for most potters, it's like throwing, trimming, glazing, firing, but dotting is its own specific step, clearly, because as soon as you see Katie's work, it's going to be like, oh yeah, that's a significant amount of time.
And it's funny because my stuff right now is in not the main room when you enter the gallery, but the side room. We do like a rotation system. But so when people are like, oh, are you an artist when I work in gallery? I say, yes, my work is in the next room. It's the blues and whites and dots. And it's very distinct. They go around the corner and they're like, oh, dots. So I like to call my pots like dot pots because it's just fun and cute. And I think it matches my personality and kind of matches my pots. So people know what they mean when I say dotting. So that's a whole phase of my work. Yeah, dotting.
I work on an hour and I finish. I want to finish talking about your lights right now. How did you this is a big question for so many people is the recognition of having your own unique style and cohesiveness, if you will, is really important. But for me, that also feels like so much pressure to, like, I have to figure out my style, like style with a capital S, and I don't have that yet.
Yeah, it really came through the ISM program. One thing at the Village, because education is such a core value, it also is a core value for the residents. Like, the residents are always experimenting and changing, and they take workshops with people that they really like, even though they're professionals, because they always want to grow and evolve. And so when I was in the ISM program, I was learning from the residents how to throw better. I was we had some workshops, like, on the weekends. We called them Master Series. Like, we had John Britt come and do a glazing workshop. And that's later that week I went and I bought all these, like, Tupperware containers to mix test glazes because I was so inspired. And so having these, like, workshops and having the mentors around me pushed me to try new things. And we would have other professionals come in to do these workshops, and they would do something on surface design, or they would do something on, we had Michael Klein, and he does soda firing, and he did some wax resist stuff and work with slip. And we had bandana pottery, and they do a lot of slip work. And watching all those workshops and then wanting to try them was a main part of learning and finding my style now. I also started going towards this minimalist direction for a little bit, where I found this glaze that I really liked, which is my microcrystalline glaze that I use now. And I tweaked it, and now it's my glaze. And I found it in a very old book, and it just said feldspar. It didn't say like Custer feldspar or, Nevsai. It just said feldspar. So I tried a few different things and tweaked it, and I was like, now this is my glaze.
That's awesome. That's fantastic.
But so I found slip trailing because I used to do it for fun, but I would do like designs and not dots. And I used to do a lot of carving. But then I was like, oh, I'll go to this minimalist style because I have these crystals in my glaze. And then I had a pinhole crisis where I lost 2 months of work in a kiln. I know, it's heartbreaking. And because all of my glaze on this particular clay body that I was using started to pinhole, and the whole kiln was lost. The pinholes were sharp and not usable. It was a disaster. Thankfully, that happened while I was in ISM, and I still had the mentors to like kind of problem solve with me what happened. But I opened the kiln, and I was like, give me 10 minutes. I went and cried in my car. And then I was like, all right, where do we go from here?
Real talk.
And seriously. And then that crisis made me reevaluate every element of my pots. I was like, you're too boring. If my shapes are simple and my glaze is simple, it's too simple. It doesn't convey my skill level. And so I started experimenting again with carving and slip trailing, and I just experimented until I found something that really spoke to my soul, and I was like, that's it. And that was the key to finding my style, was constantly experimenting and not being afraid to lose a kiln load of pots. Even though it was horrible, it got me to where I am today, and so I'm grateful for it.
Yeah. Never want to do it again. So that was.
I wouldn't do it again.
With the boring pots. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, that's what I did. I was like, these bowl forms are really simple, and if I have this one glaze on them, because the reason why I stuck with this glaze is because I hate glazing. It's my least favorite part of the process.
Thank you. Thank you. Gosh, yes, 1,000%.
Yeah. Yes, your pots look the prettiest at leather hard, and then it just goes downhill from there.
When I got into the residency program in Italy, for the first time in my life, committing every day to this one skill, to improve this skill, I was excelling pretty quickly. And there were times when it was like, oh my gosh, I'm so bad, because your recognition of what is bad increases so much before your skill set improves.
Yes. Yes.
So I was so proud of the stuff. And then also because the firing there was just completely different than the firing I had been doing in the US. It was gas kilns instead of electric. And our studio in Chicago was all about like layering glazes, like combining one on top of the other. Whereas there, that was not what you should do with the glazes. So every time, everything would come out of the kiln, and I was like, I liked that after it was bisked. And now it looks like crap.
Now it's so final, because at all the other stages, you can do these small tweaks and change it to make it more interesting, to like it better. But then glazing is so final, and then you put so much work into one pot, and it's ugly because of the glaze.
And there's no way of knowing, like, I would look at these charts or like test tiles and be like, okay, if I do this on the body and this on the rim, in the space where they merge together, this will happen. But no, that's not how chemistry works. It's not like if I mix red paint and blue paint, I get purple paint. Not the same with glazes. Nope.
And the general public does not know that. And so whenever they're like, can you do this color? I'm like, I can't. it's just so much work to try and find that color. These are my colors, and you take it or leave it. Yeah, I might just not be for you.
And that's a really important place to get to as well, as being able to say with confidence, this is what I do, this is what I don't do.
Yeah. And that's something that I learned from one of my mentors who's a resident at the studio, Lori Terrio. She does a lot of like restaurant work. Her stuff is very organic, wax resist. And she will have people who are friends and stuff be like, can you make me this? And she's like, no, that's not my style. That's not my work. But I can point you to somebody who does do something like that. And so she will say, don't be afraid to say no to an opportunity or a sale, because your time is better spent on the stuff that you really love. And then it'll convey that in the work. It takes so much time to try and mimic something else, and your time isn't really valued doing that and copying somebody else's work or somebody else's style or making a form you don't usually do. It's just not worth the time and energy.
Okay, so your days are structured on your own. You do have the once a week commitment to the gallery as a resident. Mm-hmm. Aside from your production schedule that you're setting, is there anything else within that that's kind of, what else does the actual function, keeping life functioning, look like with this with the residency program, but also just now that you are learning like what it's like to be a full-time artist?
Yeah, so I've been really bad lately and not been posting on my Instagram, so that's a main portion. Yeah, it's a main portion of what I should be doing, but most of my time has really been currently making. And then I have one day where I work gallery, and I also use that as, if it's slow, I'll use that time to do some of the admin stuff and my QuickBooks for my business, because I'm there and I'm not able to make, so I'll work on my computer and do some, planning and stuff like that. We also have this weekly meeting that we have every Thursday morning, which is early because Sarah is an early morning lady, and she's trying to make me an early morning lady, and I'm really pushing against it.
Call me after you're 30 and we'll see what happens. It might just be a 20s thing.
That's what everybody says. Yeah, day to day, I am really lucky because I have the Village Gallery that has been so successful, that really was made by the residents who founded the Village and started building it up from the ground up, and weren't making money at first. They were just like marketing and networking. So I really have been profiting on their hard work. So I try and put in the hard work there now. So my day to day, it's just dictated by myself, what I'm doing that day. And I am lucky that I don't have to have a side job because my cost of living is, because I split with my boyfriend, is pretty low. And part of the Village Potters, you also have some responsibilities for the day-to-day operation. So I try and be there during our operating hours, even though I might stay a little late. Some nights we're open till 9 because we have nighttime classes, and I try to be there as like support because I'm one of the nighttime people, without staying so late that I'm taking away time from my partner.
Yep, I think that's a beautiful point also, that, okay, Sarah was founding it, but having the team of people to where if she's a morning person, she can handle certain things, and then you're there at night so she can be home with her it goes back to that point of, there's so many solo makers out there, but really, and I'm guessing this is why they call it the Village, it takes a village to actually make it, to actually be able to grow the way you've grown in the time period that you have. I'm putting the assumption on the way that you've talked about it is because you've had this support network where you could figure out sales through what you didn't have to start from ground zero. And not to say that they've put in a ton of work, you've put in a ton of work, but being able to learn from each other, and it just creates that exponential growth that I think so many people see and dream of and wish for, because at the end of the day, you're not actually doing it by yourself.
And that's, the Village is also, I have access to all this equipment that if you were a solo maker, you would have to invest the money into. And I don't have to do that, thankfully. And that brings down my cost of goods. And so I can profit more. And having these problems arise, I can just, if there's an issue, like, why do you think this cracked? Why do you think this? I can in real time problem solve. And the Village is so when we're all there, there's really no feeling like it, because we all are looking at each other's work, critiquing, improving. And I think the other thing that I'm really benefiting from the village is that the other residents demand excellence. So for our gallery, we don't just put in our stuff, like whatever we think is good. We have to have another resident jury it in. This is good enough to go in the gallery. So they really hold everybody to a high standard of your pots are a high standard. You are a good a high standing teacher, and they just demand that from you. And if you can't meet it, then they'll help you improve it until you're there. And I think that's the other benefit of demanding excellence in our gallery, because of that extra jury process, and because our pots are all very intentional and precise and really of just a high tier, we can ask for higher prices. And so a lot of people who are young and solo makers might be doing craft shows, and they might not be the place that can, at a venue, that they can ask these higher prices because the clientele isn't there. But because the people who are coming into our studio and the excellence that we have in our pots, I'm able to ask for a higher price for my mugs. I knew that mugs are a big seller. That was another thing, like when I had to come up with prices and value my time, I was like, I hate making mugs because of the handles. Let's just all take a moment of silence for making handles. So I knew that I didn't want to sell my mug for $25 because the time that goes into attaching a handle, I'd never make it back by selling mugs at $25. So as a young maker, when I first started out, my base price for mugs was like $35. And I have only gone up since then, because I realized, like, as a strategy, the less you like making these certain things, price them higher. Because if you're going to sell them, they're going to go for a higher price, right?
Yes.
But if you really like making something, then price it a little lower and you can make more of them.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes. This is my strategy around not necessarily, you should say no to things that aren't a good fit. But yes, as a reality of somebody who's being self-employed for 11 years, sometimes you have to say yes just to pay the bills. But if an opportunity arises that I'm unsure of, you can just increase the price so that if somebody says yes, it's at least worth it to put a little more in the savings or have a little buffer in the future, even if it's not something that I'm emotionally excited about. So. And
I also price my work at a high price because I do now, this is my first year, I do have a few wholesale galleries, and it's hard to sell your work for half the price. So selling a mug, now my mugs are $42, and having to sell my mug for $21 a piece for wholesale is really hard. So I knew that wholesale was a good option for me because of how fast I can produce. It's not for everybody. Like my friend Carlisle, who's a hand builder, it's not necessarily a good fit for her because hand building takes so much longer. So I know that for me, I can do wholesale. So I knew that I wanted to price my stuff high enough so that wholesale could be a viable option to thrive.
That's a really great point. That's a really great point.
All these little tips, like the pricing things high and low and all that stuff, are all things that I learned from my mentors at the village. Like, never be afraid to ask questions. And I think that's another difference at the village is everybody is so open and honest about their knowledge. Some people are a little more like, I'm making money from this and I don't want people to copy me. Like some potters don't want to share all their little tricks and trades. But that's not the case at the village because these women have been making a living from what they're doing for 20 years. And all of them have this mindset of there's enough success out there for everybody. And mimicking somebody's style is just part of the learning process to finding your own voice and style.
Yeah.
So they truly live by it.
Yeah, that's amazing. And also that I think a great point, this is what I was thinking of before, is having that gallery and having that level of excellence, from my perspective, does two things. For one, everyone then, you're all setting your own prices, but because it's at a certain level, you're not undercutting each other by having somebody who's less experienced say, my work isn't as good as Sarah's work, so I'm going to charge half the rate, when the general public doesn't notice the difference between, I should preface this, what I was taught with photography and with any kind of high-skilled item that you're selling to an unknowledgeable audience is people can tell the difference between really bad and good. But if they don't know anything about the craft, they don't necessarily know the difference between good and great. Like Susie Jane, who... That's actually my niece's name. Oops, sorry, Susie. Didn't mean to throw you under the bus. You're 7. Joe Schmo, whoever, who just landed in Asheville for vacation, doesn't know the difference between a glaze that you took months to create your own recipe from versus something you bought from Amico that's pre-made and you don't have to worry about. And so they don't know that, and therefore they're not going to know why one mug is $42 versus another mug that's $25. If it's reasonably, they're both like, they might know the difference between something that's the weight of a paperweight versus a couple pounds. But so on the one hand, having the gallery that kind of evens the playing field, I guess, if you will, of saying this is the value of handmade ceramics, of a maker's craftsmanship, raising that bar to say this is the value of where it's at. Because I always go back and forth on the flip side of when you're aware that your work isn't as good, it doesn't feel right to charge the same amount as the professionals. Yes. But at the same time, you don't want to be undercutting the community and what's out there. And so there's this tricky balance between being in the place of people who really want to go full time and want to make a living at what they're doing, but maybe their skill set isn't high enough yet to charge what is a reasonable amount to charge to make a living, and also have that same craftsmanship where the dollar amount matches the skill. Right. That's what I'm getting at.
Totally. And I totally agree. And that's the benefit of being around women who have valued their time. And really, like Lori Terrio is one of my main business mentors at the Village. She will not let me underprice something. She'll be like, no, your time is worth more than that. And really encouraging that. And because we all work the gallery, we all take turns, like we each have different days, we sell each other's work. So I think that's another thing to remember, is that I am thrilled when I sell a $200 pot of Judy Harwood's, who's our Raku horsehair lady, because I'm really enjoying watching her success. And we just don't really have a competition between us, because with what's that saying that's like, with tides rising, all ships rise, or something like that?
Yeah, a rising tide raises all ships.
Yes, that's major, like, thing that they live by at the Village. And there's enough success to go around. And even the price undercutting, my mug might be a little more expensive than somebody else's mug by $3 or something, but we all want to see each other succeed. And so when somebody is really interested in not my work, but somebody else's work in the gallery, if I'm working, I'm still going to sell their stuff because I want them to succeed too. I'm not going to push them to go buy my stuff, because my stuff can speak for its own, and their stuff can speak for its own, but I want to watch my studio mates be successful too.
Yeah. Well, as we wrap up, because I know I'm taking up a lot of your time and I could keep talking for hours, so we're going to have to do a part 2 here. And
I'm down for a part 2. Like I said, I'm open. I'm an open book.
I love it. Also, you should warn Sarah and the rest of the Village that I'm like jotting down names. So I'm going to email them and we're going to talk business.
Absolutely.
For somebody who is trying to figure this out, who's maybe in your shoes a year ago or 2 years, who's where you were rather, for somebody who is where you were a year ago or even 3 years ago, who's just trying to figure out, like, how do I make this work? What's the reality of what this is going to look like? What haven't we touched upon that you would want to make sure to tell a solo maker?
Yeah. So as we were talking, like, about my college experience, I didn't study ceramics in college. So the way that I learned and evolved the best was talking to real life artists who are doing it right now, and not being afraid to ask questions and never stop experimenting. I've been doing this dot pots really I started experimenting with it a year and a half ago, maybe a little less. And it's totally my body of work, but I'm not like, I love it, but I want it to be more. And so I want to do more surface design, maybe try Mishima, maybe try water etching. And so never settling is, I think, my greatest suggestion is don't settle for what you're doing. Like, always experiment and always reach out to people who are doing what you want to do. So if somebody, like, for instance, Melissa Weiss, I took some of her workshops on Zoom, and I saw her at the Big Crafty. She does shows that I want to do because of the caliber and stuff. And so reach out to people who are doing what you want to do and just ask. Just don't be afraid to ask questions. Yeah.
I love it. Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, for people who haven't seen all of these dots, where do they need to come? Even if you're not posting regularly.
Yeah. All of my work that's like fresh out of the kiln and stuff, if people are in Asheville, come visit the Village Potters Clay Center. That's in the River Arts District. It's right in front of 12 Bone, so you can get some pottery and then go and get some barbecue. It's delicious. It's bad because our studio is right in front of 12 Bone, so I have to have a lot of willpower not to go get it every day for lunch. So the Village Potters, we have a gallery there, and as COVID restrictions lift, we are starting to give some tours and stuff. I am also probably most active on Instagram and interact with people most on Instagram, and that's Katie Meili Pottery. And Meili is spelled Meili, and it's actually Chinese. It's my middle name, and it means beautiful. So I'm adopted from China, I had mentioned before. And so I wanted to incorporate my Chinese identity into my business, because Katie is a very a basic white girl name. And so if people just said, "Oh, Katie is the potter," yeah, I was like, no, you'd be surprised when you saw me. Yeah. So Katie Meili Pottery, Katiemeili Pottery. You can also visit my website, katiemeilipottery.com, but I'd say I'm most active on Instagram.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much, Katie, and we will definitely touch base and queue up for round 2 as life keeps growing. I'm so excited for you.
Awesome. Thanks.
And that wraps episode 125 of the Maker's Playbook. I could have literally chatted with Katie for another 3 hours. Easily. So as you heard me mention at the start of this episode, though, I'm in the thick of the craziness of wedding season, among other things, and just life always. So I am leaning pretty heavily to doing a little season 1 break here on the podcast, and taking a couple of weeks off to get caught up on all the things. Not to mention, just better prepare these amazing conversations for all of you. That is most likely going to happen towards the end of this month, but there are a couple more conversations I want to be sure to share before all of that, so that you have plenty to binge while I take a quick 1-month break. But in the meantime, if you want to be sure not to miss a beat from all things Maker's Playbook, be sure to sign up to be on the newsletter at makers-playbook.com/newsletter. That way, you'll be the first to know about every new episode without having to worry about the Instagram algorithm stealing your updates. Speaking of Instagram, if you love this episode, I would so appreciate it if you wiped the mud off your hands right now and took a quick screenshot to share. Be sure to tag me at The Maker's Playbook and Katie at Katie Meili Pottery so we can send over our thanks. As always, you can find all of these links and Instagram handles and clickable goodies in our full show notes, which are located at makers-playbook.com/podcast. That's makers-playbook.com/podcast. Until next week, go get back to making your dreams a reality, because together, we've got this.